Hello, welcome to this demonstration of the computer skills called for in Computer Exercise 1. Basically, this is just a demonstration of how to enter data in Excel and do some simple operations on that data. So I've brought up Excel, and the first thing I'm going to do is enter a small data set. This data set consists of data on 3 variables. Let's call them student, study time, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that instead of doing study time with a space between it, I'm going to do study time with an underscore, because generally when you transfer data between programs, spaces in a variable name can lead to problems in reading the data correctly. So we'll try to name variables without using special characters, while underscore is safe for spaces. Okay, so the first student is named Bill. Second, Mary. Third, Phil. Fourth is Anna. The study values, the study time for Bill was an estimated 3 hours, 7.5 hours, 20 hours, and 11 hours. The test scores for these 4 students were 76, 82, 88, and 90. Okay, so now we've successfully managed to enter the data. Again, this is a data set consisting of 3 variables measured on 4 observations. Each student is an observation. And this is the general format that we want data files to have. Each row of the data file and in Excel rows are numbered. Each row of the data file is an observation, well, except for the first one, which is just the variable names. Although that can vary. Sometimes you just have nothing but data in here and you'll add the variable names later. Whereas the columns have different variables. And of course, remember that student is a variable too. It seems like an identifier, a code to identify each observation, and it is, but it's also a nominal level variable. Then the study time variable and the test score variable. So again, columns in a data set are variables, rows are generally observations. All right, so look, now one of the handy things about entering your data in a spreadsheet is that it makes it easy to inspect the data. You can spot missing values, you can spot errors in data entry, you can even come to conclusions about your research question just by inspecting the data and thinking about it. One thing though, it's kind of hard to read the study time variable. You know, if we just glanced here and said, oh, who studied the most, you know, at a glance you might think Mary studied the most until you read the number carefully. So it's always nice to compare numbers if you have them in a similar format. So it'd be great if we entered all these numbers with 1 digit after the decimal point to be consistent. So how are we going to do that? We're going to first highlight those 3 cells. The way you do it is you click on cell B2, and while you're clicking you drag down to cell B5, and that selects a range of cells. And now basically if we go to the home screen, there's a little submenu here called number. We click on it. We select number because that variable has numbers in it. And decimal place is 2 digits after the decimal place? No. We want only 1 digit after the decimal place, so we'll change that and go OK. And now look, all the numbers are in a comparable format. So, you know, the horizontal alignment of them is all consistent. Makes it easier to see which are the big numbers, which are the small numbers. What else? So we want to learn how to, okay, so we may be interested in doing things with these variables, these variable values, computing a new variable, for example. So let's create a new variable called ratio. And here, that's just going to be the ratio of test score to study time. Okay, so basically, for this first subject, Bill, the ratio variable would be equal to 76 divided by 3. Test score divided by study time. In a way, you could say, gee, are people getting the same benefit in test score out of their study time? Like, how many points is an extra hour of study time worth? I mean, this is one simple way of trying to answer that. So if I want to divide the entry in cell C2 by the entry in cell B2, I just define that in a formula. So you can refer to cells by their code, their column letter and their row number. So C2 divided by D2. I made a mistake. It gave me a circular reference. That's because I should have said C2 divided by B2. Much better. Okay, now I could go down to the next cell and do the same thing, except now I want to divide cell C3 divided by B3. Alright, but this is going to be tedious if I have, several hundred observations in my data set. So here's one way to do it. I can just copy that cell, go down and paste it. But I don't get the number 10.9333. I get 4.4. Why is that? Well, if we look at this cell, let me click on it and look at the formula. Excel is rather clever. It knows that if I copy a formula and paste it into a new cell, it sort of translates the reference cells. So I copied this cell which referred to C3. When I pasted it, it knew that I was talking about cell C4. If I pasted it again, it would do C5 divided by B5 here. But there's another way to do this too. I could say, okay, let me delete these for a second. Okay, if I have a formula defined in this cell, another thing I can do is just again highlight all the cells down to the bottom, and then on the home page, our home screen, home menu, I can go over here, and this button here will continue a pattern, as it says, or copy a formula. So I'm going to copy that formula all the way down that column. And sure enough, there it goes. It applied that formula to all the cells. Let's just make sure it did it right. Yes, in line 5, it divided cell C5 by B5. So this is very handy, right? You can define formulas and then copy them for a whole column quite easily. Okay, so, but you know what? Again, we have an inconsistent number of digits after the decimal point. Let's try to make that better. So I'm going to highlight all these cells, go to home, go to number, and pick the number format, and I think 2 digits after the decimal place is fine. Right, so now my ratio numbers are all sort of in the same visual format. Alright, so again, if you're following along in this Excel Lesson 1 document, I guess I still have some complaints about how this data set looks. Sometimes I find it very handy to do a couple of things. First off, I think we want to set off the first line, because remember the first line has variable names in it. So I'm going to underline the entries in those cells. I could also put a lower border on these cells if I go into cell format. But I think just underlining the text is fine. Another thing I can do is I could take these variable values for these numbers, and I always like to be honest. If you go to the home menu, you can center them. Alright, so to me this is a lot easier to read. In fact, we could center these as well. Alright, so things like this can really make a data set more readable, more inspectable, and help you to find, again, errors or detect patterns. So here's another thing is that, if I have several hundred observations, I may want to find a particular student very quickly. It'd be nice if this data set were alphabetized by name. So I'm going to select that entire column except for the header. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to sort it, sort and filter. So let's sort A to Z, yes. Okay, but here's the thing. Excel knows it would be silly to sort the observation names, the student names, and not their corresponding test score. We don't want Anna, who will be first position alphabetically, to be associated with Bill's data. So we wanted this to expand the selection. It's basically going to include these cells as well. So expand the selection and sort. And now let's see, yes, indeed, now Anna is associated with her test scores and Bill is associated with his test score. Okay, so that's very handy. What are some other things we might want to do? Well, we might want to compute basic descriptive statistics. So let's create the sum of a column. So in cell B7, it is suggested that we type a new formula. I want the quantity in B7 to reflect the sum of the study time variable for all 4 students. So I want to sum cells B2, B3, B4, and B5. So the way I do that is I say sum, and then I can just mention a range of cells. B2 colon B5 says sort all the cells from B2 to B5 inclusive. Well, sum them, yeah. And so that's the sum, 41.5. Again, I might want to center that cell. But, probably more useful than the sum, it's kind of maybe more likely that I'm interested actually in the mean or average of those scores. So let's do the average of cells B2 to B5. Enter. Okay, so the mean study time for this group of students was 10.4 hours. And I'm going to center those cells again just so they're easy to read. If I wanted, I could label those cells, right? I could say sum equals average equals, right? So, now my data file is getting to be kind of useful. So at this point, we could go on. We could, there's a function that will compute the standard deviation of the study time numbers, but we'll save that for a later lesson. For right now, let's just save the file. So we're going to save this file and go under File and left-click it, Save As, and we will say let's say save it as. Well, you can't quite see what I'm doing, but I'm going to save it as, so I know I'm off your screen. I'm going to save it with a particular file name. Again, the document here suggests that we save it as Excel Lesson 1 example. Okay, so the Excel Lesson 1 example. And again, you can't see this happening, but I can. So it is now successfully, again, if you just say save, it will save it as book 1 or whatever the file was originally called. But if you click on this, it'll let you specify where and under what name you want to save it. So complete those steps and you're done with this first lesson. I'm going to exit this and stop the recording.